Empires don't fall when their armies lose. They fall when their money does. In 1944, inside a grand hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, that truth played out again. Britain, once the financial heart of the world, was collapsing under the weight of 2 world wars. Its gold reserves were vanishing, its colonies slipping away, and its debt had exploded to record levels. Across the table sat a rising power, the United States, untouched by destruction, overflowing with gold, and ready to take control of the global system. That meeting quietly ended one empire and crowned another, not through war, but through economics. By the time the ink dried, the British pound was finished, and the US dollar had become the new ruler of world trade. But this wasn't the first time money decided the fate of empires. It's a cycle as old as civilization itself. Follow the trail of currencies through history, and you'll see the same pattern. Rise, dominance, overreach, collapse. Today, the dollar stands at the same turning point. Before we go deeper, pause for a second and subscribe, because what you're about to see isn't just history, it's happening again. To understand how money builds and destroys empires, we have to start with the first. In the 1400s, Portugal was small, poor, and surrounded by stronger kingdoms, but it had something no one else did: vision. While the rest of Europe was trapped behind Ottoman blockades, Portugal turned to the sea. They built faster ships, sharper maps, and a new system of navigation that changed everything. When Constantinople fell in 1453 and the spice routes to Asia were cut off, Portugal found another way, sailing around Africa to reach India in the Far East. That single decision transformed a forgotten kingdom into the center of global trade. The Portuguese real became the world's first true reserve currency, trusted from Lisbon to Goa to Macau. Their ships brought back gold, silk, and spices, flooding Europe with wealth and power. For decades, Portugal ruled the oceans, its empire stretching across Africa, India, and Asia. But power never comes without cost. Maintaining outposts on 4 continents drained the treasury, and rivals multiplied. The Dutch, the French, the British, all wanted a piece. Then came a royal crisis in the 1570s that tore the country apart. In 1580, Spain absorbed Portugal into the Iberian Union, and just like that, the first financial empire vanished. The Portuguese real had ruled the world for 80 years, then disappeared into history. But as Portugal fell, a new empire was already rising, fueled by mountains of silver and a hunger even greater than gold. Spain's rise began not with gold, but with a mountain. In 1545, high in the Bolivian Andes, explorers discovered Potosi, the richest silver deposit the world had ever seen. It was said that the mountain produced enough silver to build a bridge from South America to Spain. And for nearly a century, it did. Millions of coins, stamped with the mark of Potosi, the legendary pieces of 8, flooded the world's markets. The Spanish dollar became the first truly global currency, trusted across Europe, the Americas, and Asia. It even served as legal tender in the United States until 1857. Spain's empire stretched from Mexico to Manila, from Peru to the Philippines, all bound together by silver. The wealth seemed endless, but it was poison wrapped in metal. Every shipment home fed inflation. Every victory birthed new debt. Kings spent faster than the mines could produce. Charles I left behind mountains of unpaid loans, and his son Philip II defaulted on Spain's debts 4 times in just 40 years. The silver that made Spain rich also made prices explode. Inflation tripled, trade slowed, and creditors fled. What once fueled empire now hollowed it from within. The gold-laden galleons arriving in Seville no longer meant prosperity, they meant panic. Every ounce of silver Spain dug up made its currency weaker, not stronger. When the supply from Potosi dropped by half under Philip III, the economy imploded. By 1641, the empire's financial system collapsed. The world's richest nation was bankrupt again. The Spanish silver dollar had ruled global trade for more than a century, but in the end, it drowned in its own wealth. As Spain's fortunes faded, a new power in the north was waiting to take the throne, a small republic built not on conquest, but on commerce.
When Spain collapsed under the weight of its silver, a small nation of traders stepped into the spotlight. The Dutch Republic had no empire of gold or vast colonies of slaves. It had something far more powerful: innovation. In the 1600s, Amsterdam became the beating heart of global finance. The Dutch guilder wasn't just a currency, it was trust itself. Backed by the stability of the Bank of Amsterdam, it became the preferred medium for merchants across Europe, Africa, and Asia. The Dutch created what we now call capitalism. Joint stock companies, stock exchanges, insurance, and modern banking all began here. The Dutch East India Company, the VOC, became the first multinational corporation richer than some kingdoms. Their ships carried not just goods, but the idea of global trade itself. For the first time in history, wealth wasn't tied to gold or silver, but to paper. contracts, and confidence. The system worked for a while. From 1640 to 1720, the Dutch guilder dominated world commerce, financing over a third of global trade. Amsterdam was the Wall Street of its age. But even the cleverest systems break under pressure. Endless wars with England drained their wealth. The Fourth Anglo-Dutch War between 1780 and 1784 shattered their navy, destroyed trade routes, and bankrupted the Republic. The once unshakable Bank of Amsterdam was forced to print unbacked money to survive. By the end of the 18th century, the guilder's power had faded. The empire built on finance collapsed into debt. And as Dutch sails vanished from the seas, the world's next empire was already rising. An island nation powered by coal, machines, and the Industrial Revolution. As the Dutch faded, Britain rose from their ashes, armed not with ships of commerce, but with an industrial engine that would dominate the world. The 1700s marked the birth of a new empire, powered by coal, iron, and steam. The British pound became more than currency, it became empire itself. Backed by the gold standard, it was the most trusted money on earth. By the 1800s, over 60% of all world trade was invoiced in pounds. London turned into the financial capital of the planet, where insurance, commodities, and global banking were all born. The British Empire stretched across continents, from India to Africa to the Caribbean, controlling 1/4 of the world's population and land. The sun never set on it, and neither did its money. The pound ruled through confidence and colonial control. Every colony used it, every nation traded by it. It seemed unstoppable, an empire built not just on ships and soldiers, but on credit, contracts, and calculation. But even the strongest empires fall the same way, through debt. The cost of endless wars, from Napoleon to the trenches of World War I, bled Britain dry. The empire's greatest strength, its ability to borrow and fund expansion, became the weapon that destroyed it. By 1919, its national debt had exploded from £650 million to over £7 billion. Factories slowed, colonies demanded independence, and the City of London, once the beating heart of the world's economy, began to tremble under its own weight. The Second World War was the final blow. By 1945, Britain's debt hit 270% of GDP. The empire had won on the battlefield, but lost in the bank. The pound had ruled for over 2 centuries, longer than any currency in modern history, but it couldn't survive the cost of global power. Britain's wealth was now an illusion, an empire financed on promises it could no longer keep. And in 1944, in a quiet hotel in New Hampshire, the British century officially ended. The pen replaced the sword, and the world crowned a new financial king. The age of the dollar had begun.
July 1944. In the quiet mountain town of Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, delegates from 44 nations gathered to decide the future of the world's economy. The British Empire was broke, its vaults empty, its colonies slipping away. 2 world wars had drained it dry. Across the Atlantic, America stood tall, untouched by war, overflowing with gold, and holding over 2/3 of the world's reserves. The moment had arrived. The global financial crown was about to change hands. Inside the Mount Washington Hotel, they built a new order, one that would link every major currency to the US dollar, and the dollar itself to gold at $35 per ounce. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were born that summer, symbols of cooperation masking a quiet takeover. Behind the polished speeches and diplomatic smiles, Britain's debt became America's opportunity. The world didn't realize it yet, but a new empire had just been born, one ruled not by colonies, but by credit. The United States emerged as the new financial superpower, and the dollar became the world's reserve currency. From London's empire of trade to Washington's empire of paper, control had shifted, and with it, history had turned another page. For the next 25 years, the Bretton Woods system made the dollar untouchable. Every major economy depended on it. The dollar was as good as gold, until it wasn't. Because by the 1960s, America was doing exactly what every empire before it had done, spending more than it earned, printing more than it could back, and fighting wars it couldn't afford. The system built on gold was cracking, and the man who would finally break it sat in the White House, ready to make a decision that would change money forever. It was August 15, 1971, a quiet Sunday evening. Most Americans were watching TV, unaware that their world was about to change forever. From the Oval Office, President Richard Nixon delivered a calm, calculated message. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold. That single sentence ended centuries of financial order. The temporary suspension never ended. The dollar was no longer backed by gold, only by trust.
The gold window was closed, and with it, the last anchor of value disappeared. For generations, money was something you could hold. Now, it was only something you could believe in. Nixon didn't just change money, he broke it. Freed from gold, the U.S. began printing without restraint. Inflation soared, debt exploded, and the age of paper wealth began. The world entered the era of fiat currency, money backed not by metal, but by faith in government. And with faith comes illusion. Prices rose, wages stagnated, and the dollar's strength became a story built on confidence alone. The gold standard's death created something new, a system where governments could create money with a keystroke and pass the cost to the future. It was the beginning of a global addiction to debt. Nixon's decision didn't just rewrite economics, it redefined power. Because from that moment, those who controlled the printing press controlled the world.
After Nixon severed gold from the dollar, America needed a new anchor, something to replace trust in metal with trust in demand. The answer came not from Wall Street, but from the deserts of the Middle East. In 1973, as oil prices skyrocketed after the OPEC crisis, the United States made a deal with Saudi Arabia that would quietly reshape the global economy. The deal was simple but genius. In exchange for American military protection, Saudi oil would be sold exclusively in US dollars. Every barrel bought, every shipment paid, all in dollars. By 1975, every OPEC nation had agreed. The dollar was no longer backed by gold, it was backed by oil. The petrodollar was born. And with it, America built a new kind of empire, one based not on conquest, but consumption. Because every country needed oil, every country now needed dollars. Demand for U.S. currency became endless, and Washington could print wealth without consequence. Wars were funded, deficits ignored, and power expanded far beyond borders. The same system that freed America also trapped the rest of the world. Nations had to earn or borrow dollars to buy energy, tying global growth to U.S. debt. For a while, it worked perfectly. But as every empire learns, debt is a slow poison. The petrodollar gave America control, but it also created an illusion of infinite wealth. Decades later, that illusion would begin to crack.
For decades, the dollar seemed invincible. It powered global trade, dominated financial markets, and backed entire nations. But beneath the surface, the cracks began to spread. In the early 2000s, America's wars in Iraq and Afghanistan drained trillions. The financial crisis of 2008 shattered confidence in the system. And to keep everything afloat, the Federal Reserve printed more money in a single decade than in the previous 100 years combined. The illusion of endless prosperity came at a cost: inflation, inequality, and a mountain of debt that could never truly be repaid. While Washington drowned in deficits, other powers began to move. China built its own financial networks. Russia pushed for trade in rubles and yuan, and the BRICS alliance started creating alternatives to the dollar system. Slowly, countries stopped trusting the promise that the dollar would always hold its value. Central banks began buying gold again, just like they did before every major shift in monetary power. By 2025, the dollar's share of global reserves had fallen below 58%, its lowest in decades. The same pattern that destroyed the Portuguese real, the Spanish silver, the Dutch guilder, and the British pound was repeating in plain sight. But history's warnings rarely arrive with alarms. They whisper. The dollar still reigns, but for how long? Every empire believes it will be the exception. None ever are. Hit subscribe and drop a like, because history is warning us again. Every empire thought it could print power forever, until trust ran out. The dollar story isn't over, but the countdown has begun. Empires don't fall when their armies lose, they fall when their money does.